Pause. Before you send that message, before you call them again, before you make one more attempt to explain yourself, to justify your worth, to make them realize what they're losing, you need to hear this. What I'm about to tell you is something almost nobody will say to you right now. Yet it's the one truth that can actually change everything. Here is the hard reality about human psychology that most people spend their lives avoiding. People do not truly value what is always available. It doesn't matter how kind you've been to someone, how loyal you stayed, how much effort you gave, or how many times you showed up. If you are always there, always accessible, always the one reaching out, you will eventually be taken for granted. This is not necessarily a flaw in the other person. It's something deeply embedded in human nature itself. And once you genuinely understand this, everything begins to shift. Over years of observing behavior in different areas like leadership, relationships, and social dynamics, one pattern keeps repeating itself. It's what can be called the law of absence. The person who is constantly present slowly loses influence. The person who understands when to step back creates a kind of quiet pull that others can't ignore. Think about it carefully. Reflect on the people you've wanted the most in your life, the ones who stayed in your thoughts longer than they should have. Were they always available, always within reach? Or were they the ones who felt slightly out of grasp, the ones who created a sense of uncertainty? This is not about playing games. It's important to be clear about that. This is a deeper psychological reality. When someone is always present, the mind begins to categorize them as guaranteed, and guaranteed things slowly become invisible. Just like you don't wake up every day amazed that electricity works in your home, because it's always there, constant and expected. And this is where the real tragedy lies. Genuine, loyal, and caring people become invisible to the very individuals they care about the most. Not because they failed, but because they gave too consistently without pause. They never stepped away. So what is the simple shift? It's this. You stop being constantly available, not from anger, not as punishment, and not as a manipulative strategy, hoping someone will notice. You do it because you choose to redirect your energy. All the time, emotion and attention you've been investing into someone who no longer matches it, you bring that energy back to yourself. When you do this, something unexpected happens. First, there is silence, and that silence feels uncomfortable, even painful at the beginning. Your instinct will be to break it, to reach out again, but you shouldn't. Because while you sit in that silence, something is also happening on the other side. The human mind struggles with unfinished patterns. When someone who was always there suddenly isn't, the brain begins to fixate. Questions start forming. Where did they go? What changed? Did I lose something important? That mental loop creates awareness, and that awareness begins restoring value. You cannot create this effect by explaining more, giving more, or trying harder. It only comes through absence. But the deeper truth, the part most people overlook, is that it's not really about them coming back. It's about what begins to happen within you during that distance. When you stop focusing on someone who doesn't value you, when you stop analyzing every word and every silence, you begin to return to yourself. You start reconnecting with parts of you that were quietly fading. Your sense of worth, your identity beyond their approval, begins to rebuild. This transformation is visible. People who once felt diminished, constantly adjusting themselves, walking carefully, making themselves smaller just to maintain connection, begin to change. When they step back, when they go quiet, something shifts within weeks. Their posture straightens, the neediness fades, They stop over-explaining. A calm strength begins to appear. And ironically, that's often when the other person starts to feel something they didn't expect, the fear of losing you for real. There is something important to understand about the human ego. Every person, regardless of how confident they appear, has a need to feel important, to feel that their presence matters, that they have an effect. When you are always available, you are constantly feeding that need for them. They begin to feel significant not because they earned it, but because you never stopped showing up. But the moment you stop, something shifts. Their sense of certainty disappears, and that uncertainty creates tension. It forces awareness. Some people will react negatively. They may say you've changed, that you've become distant or cold. Let them say it. What they're really expressing is discomfort with the shift in dynamic. They are no longer in the same position of control or certainty, and that reaction gives you valuable information. It reveals how they truly relate to you, because someone who genuinely values you, even if they became too comfortable, will respond differently. They will reach out, they will reflect, they will try to understand, and that reflection is where real change becomes possible. But beyond all of this, the most important part is not about them at all. It's about what this situation reveals about you. Why were you accepting less than you deserved? Why did silence feel so threatening? Why were you willing to shrink yourself just to maintain a connection? These questions matter more than anything else. And the answers often trace back to early patterns. The way we experience love and validation in the beginning shapes what we tolerate later. If attention was inconsistent, if you had to earn affection, if love felt unpredictable, your mind learned to associate effort and pursuit with connection. So as an adult, you may find yourself in relationships where you are always giving more, always trying harder, always the one at risk of losing everything. You might call it loyalty or love, but often it's a pattern repeating itself. This is why reclaiming your value is not about changing the other person. It's about understanding your own patterns deeply enough to break them. The silence, the distance, the withdrawal is not a tactic. It is discipline. It is the decision to stop outsourcing your worth. When you truly shift your energy inward, something solid begins to form within you. A foundation that no one can give and no one can take away. And people sense that. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you choose. It changes what you accept and what you walk away from. And most importantly, it changes the kind of people you attract into your life. So the shift is simple but powerful. Go quiet. Turn inward. Stop trying to prove your value to someone who has chosen not to recognize it. Not because you want them to chase you, but because your energy deserves to grow, not disappear. Some people will come back, and if they do, it will be because they became aware. Others won't. And that too is a gift, because it frees you to align with people who see your value without constant proof. Remember this clearly. Your worth does not decrease just because someone failed to recognize it. And the moment you truly understand that, deeply and completely, you will stop asking for space in places where you were never fully valued. You will create your own space, and the right people will meet you there. When someone no longer values you, try this shift and observe what unfolds. You stepped back. You became quiet, and now something unusual is happening. Either they returned or they didn't. And regardless of the outcome, you're left with a feeling you didn't expect. Not relief, not victory, something deeper, something slightly uncomfortable. Because the truth is, when you stop chasing someone, you inevitably come face to face with yourself. And that is the real test. Not whether they return, but what you choose to do with who you are when they are no longer there. I told you before that absence creates value, and that remains true. But I want to take it deeper now, because too many people misunderstand that idea and turn it into a tactic, like a calculated move in a game. They go silent for a few days, watch closely to see if the other person reacts, and then rush back in with the same intensity, the same emotional dependency, the same patterns that caused the problem in the first place, and nothing truly changes. The cycle simply resets, and months later they find themselves in the exact same position, asking the same painful questions. Why doesn't this person value me? Why am I always the one who cares more? Here's the answer, and it may be uncomfortable to sit with. The reason the pattern keeps repeating is not because you haven't discovered the right strategy yet. It is because you haven't changed the deeper force that keeps attracting this dynamic into your life. You are, in a sense, meeting the same person in different forms. The faces shift, the names are different, the circumstances vary, but the core experience remains almost identical. And this is not coincidence or bad luck. It is a signal, a consistent and undeniable signal from your own psychology, indicating that something deeper needs your attention. There is a fascinating and often painful concept in human behavior that explains this. It was described by Sigmund Freud as the repetition compulsion. In simple terms, it means we are unconsciously driven to recreate the emotional environments of our earliest relationships, not because they were pleasant, but because they are familiar. Familiarity feels safe to the nervous system. Even if the experience is painful, if it is a pain you recognize, your mind knows how to handle it. It has navigated that territory before. But unfamiliar experiences, even if they are healthy, stable, and genuinely loving, can feel unsettling. They feel uncertain, almost suspicious, as if they might not be real or might disappear at any moment. So what happens is subtle but powerful. You meet someone stable, someone consistent, someone who is genuinely present and available. And instead of feeling at ease, something inside you begins to withdraw. You question their intentions. You create distance. Their reliability starts to feel suffocating rather than comforting. And then, almost like a compass needle returning to its default direction, you find yourself drawn back towards someone who gives you that familiar emotional pattern, the one where you have to work for attention, where you feel slightly unsteady, where you are never completely sure where you stand. You call it chemistry, you call it passion, but what you are actually feeling is recognition, the recognition of an old wound. So the real shift, the deeper level of this entire process, is not about what you do with another person. It is about becoming radically honest with yourself about the story you are living out when it comes to love. What do you truly believe you deserve at your core? Not what you say out loud, not what you present to others, but what your choices consistently reveal. Because here is something rarely said clearly enough. Self-worth is not just a feeling. It is a practice. It is something you demonstrate daily through the decisions you make and the behaviors you tolerate. Many intelligent, self-aware people have a huge gap between the value they intellectually understand they have and the value they actually live out through their actions. They know they deserve better, yet they accept less repeatedly. And every time they do that, every time they override their inner voice, they send a powerful message inward. My intuition does not matter. My limits can be crossed. My value is something others get to define. This leads directly into what boundaries really are, not as a popular buzzword or a surface-level idea, but as a core mechanism of personal power. A boundary is not a wall to push people away. It is a standard you hold for yourself about what you will and will not accept in your experience. And the defining feature of a true boundary is consequence. Without consequence, a boundary is merely a preference, and preferences are easily ignored if there is no cost attached to crossing them. People will test and stretch those limits repeatedly if nothing changes when they do. The person who stopped valuing you did not arrive at that point suddenly. It happened gradually over time. There was a moment early on when a line was crossed. Maybe it was something small, like a canceled plan that went unaddressed, or a comment that felt wrong but you dismissed. Maybe it was a pattern of imbalance where you gave more and they took more, and you normalized it because you didn't want to seem demanding. In each of those moments, a message was communicated and received. There are no consequences here. I can take without losing. I can diminish without risk. And so the pattern continued, not always out of intention, but out of the natural human tendency to expand into the space that is allowed. So what does real, lasting change actually look like? Not the temporary version, not the brief silence followed by the same behaviors. Real change begins with a decision that sounds simple, but is extremely difficult to live by. The decision is this: I will no longer act from fear. Not from the fear of losing someone, not from the fear of being alone, not from the fear of appearing too much or too difficult. Instead, I will act from clarity, from values, from an honest understanding of what I need and what I am willing to give. When you begin operating from values rather than fear, your communication transforms first. You stop hinting and start expressing clearly. You stop expecting others to read your mind and instead say directly what you feel and what you need. You stop rehearsing conversations internally and begin having them openly. And something remarkable happens when your words come from genuine inner stability rather than anxiety. People respond differently. The same message delivered from a grounded place carries a completely different impact, because people are not just hearing your words, they are sensing the conviction behind them. Another important consequence of being in a dynamic where you are undervalued is something rarely discussed: the slow erosion of identity. It happens so gradually that you often don't notice it until you are deeply affected by it. You begin organizing your life around the other person. You check your phone before checking in with yourself. Your mood starts to depend on their mood. You lose clarity about your own desires, your own preferences, your own thoughts. You become someone orbiting around another person who may not even realize your presence in that way. The real shift is to become the center again, to rebuild your own gravity. This means returning to the parts of your life that exist independently of any relationship, revisiting interests you abandoned, pursuing goals you paused, reconnecting with people you drifted away from, sitting quietly with your own thoughts until they become clear again. These are not distractions. They are reconstruction. They are the rebuilding of a self, and a grounded, evolving, authentic self is one of the most naturally compelling things there is, not because it is trying to attract, but because it is real, because it carries a sense of wholeness that cannot be imitated for long. You were told that if you apply this simple shift, you would see what happens. So let's be honest about what actually happens. Some people return, they feel your absence, they notice the change, and they reflect. They recognize what they overlooked. They come back with different energy. If you have done the real inner work, you will be able to tell the difference between genuine growth and temporary reaction, between someone who has truly changed and someone who simply returned because your absence became uncomfortable. That difference is critical. One leads to something new, the other leads back to the same cycle, and some people will not come back at all. And as painful as that can feel, it is often one of the most important outcomes, because it removes uncertainty completely. It shows you clearly that what you thought existed was not what was actually there. That clarity, even though it can feel harsh, is a form of freedom. It creates space for something more aligned, something that does not require constant effort just to maintain your place. After years of observing human behavior, one truth stands out. The people who are most valued in relationships and beyond are not the ones who are always available or endlessly accommodating. They are the ones who have built a steady, unshakable relationship with their own worth. They know what they bring. They are engaged with their own lives. They have standards, and they hold them with calm strength. Not rigidly, not coldly, but with clarity and self-respect. That is what you are actually building here. Not a strategy to win someone back, not a method to appear more desirable, but a life that is self-directed, grounded, and increasingly aligned with who you truly are. And when you are living that life, genuinely and not performatively, the question of who values you begins to lose its urgency. Because you are no longer waiting for someone else to define your worth, you are already living in alignment with it, and that changes everything.